My name is Mia. I'm 18 years old and I'm from the West Midlands. I was diagnosed autistic at 16, so not really that long ago. Um, my diagnosis kind of came about after COVID. Um, so when we came back and we started to integrate back into society. I found it really, really difficult going from this completely online life, online engaging, just being at home and not in the outside world, to then going back into the outside world and back into in-person relationships. It was really, really difficult. And having all that time at home meant that I started to unmask, obviously unknowingly, because I didn't know I was autistic at the time. So yeah, going back into society and not being able to put this mask back on, and yeah, not understanding what I was supposed to be saying or doing, especially because at the age I was, being like a teenager, going back into society where relationships are a big thing, and yeah, things like that. It was just so complex and so complicated that I couldn't cope. I was living with really severe anxiety, in school, just everywhere. Life was hard going back into society, as it was for a lot of autistic people. And that was kind of how my diagnosis came about, as they could see my autistic traits a lot more, going back into like the in-person society. So that was why I was diagnosed so late. As well, a lot of people, we say COVID was the like accelerator, or there was a word I was going to use but I can't remember. It was COVID like amplified and made people notice that they were autistic, which is why the rates of diagnosis have gone up massively. But yeah, that was for me kind of how my diagnosis came about. So yeah. So for me, going back to school after COVID, it was really challenging because you were back in a really, really busy building with thousands of students and this whole sensory environment that I was almost unfamiliar with after being at home in the quiet, in the peace of just the comfort of my family, to then going back into this place with sounds and lights and people and interactions, and all of these demands which I never had for so long, because we spent nearly about 2 years at home, and yeah, without all of that. So then going back into that environment, it was just so wholly and truly overwhelming. And because I didn't have that mask anymore, I couldn't hide how difficult it was to manage in that environment. I couldn't hide that. So it made me present as really anxious. I would often cry a lot. I'd be really reserved and shy. And obviously for my school, it was challenging for them because I went from being a really, really bright academic. I was still shy before COVID, but very bright, very academic. I followed all the rules. I did everything. I was never any trouble at all in school, to then this person who couldn't manage, couldn't even attend lessons or anything. So I went from being this really unproblematic student to now this one that they can barely manage, barely keep in lesson. So I think for school it was a big shock, and they struggled to manage that. As I guess COVID was new for everyone. Everyone was navigating this new world and this new world that we didn't quite know what to do with. We were navigating a world of trying to like stop the spread and things like that. So for them, it was challenging because, like I said, they'd never experienced anything like it. So sometimes their approach wasn't always the right way in dealing with my emotions and my challenges. So a lot of the time, they didn't manage things or do things quite as they should have done. And back then, my school also weren't aware that I was autistic. They did pick up over time on my autistic traits. They did pick up on them. But yeah, as I progressed through school, my behaviour did start to become more challenging. Because my anxiety was so high, I often became quite defiant to rules, because I was so anxious that when a demand or something was put on me that I couldn't do, I would just not do it. And to them, I guess that kind of came across as me having bad behaviour, I guess. And this continued for a really, really long time, where I was being mistreated. I was wholly, so deeply misunderstood by them. And a lot of traumatic things happened for me in school with staff. And now I'm no longer in school, but I live with complex PTSD because of some of the things that happened to me in school, and because of some of the way that staff dealt with my behaviour, rather than coming from a compassionate and understanding and empathetic place. It was more of a cold and harsh, hostile place. And I was almost pushed to the side, I guess. They thought if they just left me and left my behaviour, that maybe it would go away. But it never did, and their approaches never worked. And I guess, again, they didn't realise at the start that I was autistic. So yeah, their approaches to things weren't always suitable for me. But yeah, those few years of my life were really, really challenging. And yeah, really challenging. And school obviously is not a good memory for me. As it is for most autistic people, school was never a good place. But yeah, I now live with the aftermaths of not being treated very well. Before COVID, I did have quite a big friend group. I was friends with the so-called popular girls, and that was kind of how I slipped through the cracks and how people didn't notice how different I was, because I was friends with the popular girls, and I did so much to mask and fit in and to be like them. Even almost to the point where I became one of them. And I think COVID gave me that opportunity to mask myself more socially, if that makes sense. So socially, I became a little bit more aware because I had time to search. I genuinely Googled about how to fit in and how to be like other people. And yeah, because of that, I literally became like a clone of these girls that I was friends with. And then after I became that, I thought, again, after COVID, I'd go back in and I'd just be one of them. Because I've always felt like an outsider. I've never been the same, no matter how hard I tried. I've always been an outsider, and not the same as everyone else. But yeah, COVID proved that even more after we went back into that social environment in person, where I then had to put what I'd learned into practice, and it was too hard. It was far too hard. People could tell that I was trying, and as teenage girls do, there was lots of arguments. I can't handle confrontation, so for me in that situation, I would just completely be reserved, absolutely come out of it. And because my anxiety and my mental health difficulties were starting to show, they kind of used that against me, and that was the line where I kind of said, I can't be your friend anymore. So it was almost my decision, but I stepped away from that friend group and then went through the last few years of school with no friends at all, because I didn't know how to make them. That friend group I kind of been with since the start of being at secondary school, and it was mainly because of my cousin. She was also friends with this friend group, and that was kind of how I got in with the friend group. And then yeah, after that I didn't have any friends, and I think that was where school noticed a lot. or I think that was where the autistic traits they picked up on, because I had this inability to make friends after falling out with that friend group. Since I haven't made any friends since leaving school. I have one friend who I've known since I was born, and that is pretty much my only friend, because it's very hard to make friends in this world nowadays, especially like when I'm not fully engaged in a social setting. Like I don't go to a school, I don't go to like groups or anything. But yeah, I'm quite happy not having friends. I quite enjoy it. Yeah, I enjoy not having the demands of other people. So yeah. I think, well, for both of my parents, it was really challenging at the time, because all of my behaviours and this really challenging, or, well, it was obviously me showing that I was struggling, only really happened at school. So when school would contact home and be like, what is going on? Why is this happening? And obviously home would go, nothing's happening here, like, there's no problem. They at school tried to pin it on the fact that something was going on at home, and they really focused on that something was going on at home, when it wasn't. My home life is brilliant. I have the best parents, so supportive, as well as my two sisters. We have had an amazing upbringing, so yeah, that was what they kept focusing on. I don't think my parents at the time really understood what was going on, because obviously it was new for them as well. Like this child that was once really compliant and probably the easy child then became challenging, and all of these new things were coming up. And over time, my anxiety and my struggles did start to tip over at home, when my family were noticing a lot of changes within me and my presentation and behaviour. And that was when they did start to question. But I didn't, I don't think I had the words to describe what was happening to me. So no one ever really knew what happened to me in school. No one knew how they treated me or what they said. Because at the time I didn't understand what they were doing wrong. I thought this is what they did to everyone. Which now, obviously being out of it and being like detoxed of that school environment, that's not how people are treated, and that's not how they should approach things. But yeah, at the time it was kind of it became my normal. It became normal for me to be treated that way. My parents didn't know either, which they wouldn't have. But obviously now they hold so much resentment and anger towards the school and what they did to me. But yeah, at the time, no one really knew. It was a bit of a minefield for everyone. But yeah, now obviously they can't seem to fathom the understanding of why they did what they did. And I think I will forever crave that justice of wanting to know why I was treated that way and why I wasn't listened to, and things like that. Yeah. So living with complex PTSD, or otherwise known as CPTSD, it is similar to PTSD, but there are just additional things that come with it. So for me, it's kind of feeling a sense of shame and worthlessness, and kind of a feeling that no one else understands what it was like to live through the trauma, as well as a lot of derealisation, a lot of loss of identity, and things like that are additional to the traditional symptoms of PTSD. So like flashbacks, a bit of irritability, being scared of your triggers, not wanting to go back to places. But as it says in the name, complex PTSD is just that bit more complex. And it's more defined as when you've had a reoccurrence of traumatic events. So PTSD typically is where something it's usually one event that is really bad has happened, and that is what traumatised you. But for people living with complex PTSD, it's the reoccurrence of these traumatic events over a period of time. So for me, I went through some quite significant traumatic events over the period of 2 years. And often the people who cause the trauma are people who you had trust in. So for me, I did have trust in the members of staff in school. I was meant to be safe in school, and I was not, because of the way I was treated. And again, the way I was treated and the trauma went over a matter of 2, maybe a bit more years before it stopped, or until I left. So that is kind of the difference. And again, as the name says, it's a bit more complex to treat, and more complex to live with, as not only do you have those additional traits, it also, you're at higher risk of self-harm, self-injury and suicidal thoughts. You have a much higher chance of living with that with CPTSD than just PTSD. But yeah, it's mainly that kind of trauma from someone you trust, as well as it happened over a long period of time. So things that happened to me, like with staff, I was often manipulated a lot. And I've started using the term abused. I was almost emotionally abused by the staff, because I wouldn't do the things that they wanted. And they'd often tell me things that obviously I didn't want to hear. They'd say things like, oh, there are people who really need help, who need to be like getting this support. So almost diminishing my needs and my struggles. And as I said, they'd use a lot of manipulation strategies to try and get me to stop doing the behaviour I was doing, just for their ease. I was often ignored. Staff were told, I don't know who by, but they were told to ignore me if I was struggling or if I was showing that I was distressed. Staff were told to just ignore me, just walk past, pretend like I wasn't there. And obviously that was quite traumatic for someone who was struggling, and things like this happened over 2+ years. So now that trauma is kind of more deep rooted, which I guess is where the complex PTSD comes from. So, yeah. So I left school because of the trauma. So I'm technically 2 years behind in my education because I never got to finish. So I left officially in April this year, so not even that long ago, but I stopped going to the actual building back over a year ago now, because I was that traumatised that when it came to go back the academic year, I couldn't get myself there. Because I'm that traumatised. I was so scared. It's actually that building over there. That was the school that traumatised me. So even I couldn't get out the house. It wasn't safe for me because, like I said, I was that scared. I'd have so many flashbacks, and I would just like drop to the floor. I wouldn't be able to get there. I'd try to run away or things like that. So instead, we made the compromise for me to do online school. So I joined by teams to do my lessons, but it wasn't working again because the trauma was completely consuming me. So officially, I left April, but it was much before that. We've tried to get an EHCP in place. I don't even know what that is, an education, health and care plan. But we've had plenty of trouble with that. So I've not officially finished my education, but maybe one day. So yeah, it's not even that long ago. It's really hard. It really, really is. Obviously living so close, I've had traumatic events where teachers have come to my house, like if I've not attended and they've come, or I wasn't safe to walk home, so they'd walk me home. This was back like years ago during the trauma, so I still have flashbacks that like they're outside my house. and things like that, and it's so hard. And my little sister, she still goes there, so she's in year 11, and that's really hard as well, especially as a family, because I can be triggered like that. I can't listen to her talk about it, because obviously teachers who did this to me still work there, so my sister still engages with them every day. So it's kind of knowledge in our house that my sister doesn't talk to me about it. We think she's going to leave for college, so she'll go to college September next year. So hopefully we'll be completely done with it. But it's so hard, knowing I'm like meters, like minuscule distance. And my bedroom's the one upstairs, so when I open my blind or my curtains, that is what I see. So it is hard, but something you just kind of learnt to live with, I guess. But yeah, not the most pleasant that it's right there in front of me. But it was convenient when I did go there. I mean, I could leave the house like a minute before the deadline, like the doors closed, and I'd still be there on time. So that was great. But yeah, not now. It's not great. But yeah, it's just kind of what I live with. So yeah. So one of the things I'm most passionate about is like disability advocacy and making the world as accessible as it is. And then another main goal of mine is to change the education system, so things that happen to me doesn't happen again, and to make sure that there is a place for autistic people like me who their needs can't be met in a mainstream setting, but my academic needs can't be met in a specialist setting. So I'm kind of in the middle where there's nowhere for me, and that's kind of my goal. So everything I'm doing at the moment is working towards getting experience and knowledge, and just kind of gaining an understanding of what I need to do to get to the place that I want to be. So I volunteer once a week at a primary school, where I majority support with the SEN students, so the special educational needs students. I run an intervention which focuses on retaining information, listening skills, and engaging skills. So I run that intervention in the school, as well as recently I've been meeting with students to fill in their IEPs, which is individual education plans. So I do a lot of that, as well as a lot of regulation work with children, and also supporting with a lot of the Makaton in the school. I am level 4 Makaton trained. I did that about a year ago now, and I'm really passionate about like teaching Makaton and people understanding what Makaton is and why we need it. So I do that within the school. I'm also currently learning British Sign Language, and I'm volunteering in a deaf centre to kind of just learn more about deaf culture, as well as expanding my knowledge and understanding of British Sign Language, as well as being a hearing person, advocating for them to kind of outline the importance of BSL in today's society. I also work for a charity where we support disabled people who may be socially isolated. So I have a telephone call once a week with my buddy where we just catch up, we talk about our weeks, anything really that she wants to talk about, anything that's of interest. What else do I do in my week? I'm still quite a bit. Oh, I also work for Oliver McGowan, and I do my training through that where I share my story as well. Just to kind of get to that goal of making this world more accessible for people like me, I guess. For me, I think one of the main things that people really, truly need to realise is that all behaviour is a form of communication. People can often get that label of just being badly behaved, but no one asks why. Why are they doing this? What are they trying to achieve, or what are they trying to communicate? So people often just see bad behaviour and just go, oh, they're just badly behaved, but not actually exploring maybe why are they presenting that way. And it was the same with me. My behaviour was a form of communication. It was my way of communicating what I couldn't say out loud. It was my way of showing how hard it was for me to come back into this world, this really overwhelming world. And again, people just put it down to me wanting to be defiant, to me wanting this, almost wanting attention, but that was the last thing that I wanted. I didn't want attention. I couldn't help what I was doing. I couldn't help crying or being upset or overwhelmed. And I think that was probably one of the main things I will always say is every single behaviour is a form of communication, no matter what they're trying to communicate, whether, they're badly behaving because they want attention or they crave that like adrenaline, but then that means that they're not receiving that adrenaline in a healthy way. So that would probably be the main thing, as well as trying to communicate with the child or the person who is of interest. So for me, I was never really communicated with. No one ever really asked me, what can we do? It was always asking my parents or asking my teachers, and never actually me, myself. And I tried to help myself as best as I could, but when they wouldn't listen to what I had to say, my help was useless. There was no point me trying to help myself if other people didn't want to help either. So yeah, definitely engaging with the person or asking them, what shall we try, what shall we do? And I think especially acknowledging that you're not going to get it right first time. So for me, some of the things that staff did thinking they were helping, so they thought they were helping by doing what they were doing. So they thought they were helping by asking me loads of questions, asking loads of questions, being like, what's wrong, what can we do, what's happened? Whereas for me in that moment, because I was so totally overwhelmed, I couldn't respond, like verbally, I couldn't speak, and that often presented to them as, I don't want to talk, leave me alone, which wasn't actually the case. I wanted them to be there. I use it to be the motivator, to be, because I do think my story is quite powerful, and especially when people do meet me, they will never like see the person that I was and how hard I struggled. I think telling that story is quite powerful because they can now see the person that it's made me, I think. So I absolutely love theme parks and roller coasters. That's like my thing. Hence we're going to Disneyland Paris. I'm so excited. I actually have a tattoo based on my favourite roller coaster. So this one, it's also got so this is the slogan and this is like the Logan, find your fearless. So obviously living with PTSD and finding your fearless is quite a meaningful thing to me. And yeah, that roller coaster holds a very special place in my heart. But yeah, absolutely love the adrenaline. I just love them. I could talk about it for hours and hours. But yeah, as well as my cats. I love my cats and my dog. They bring me so much joy. Well, all of my pets actually. I have a niece who's 1 year old, and I love her to bits as well. Yeah, my family is really, really important to me. What else do I love? I think I just like advocating, like I said, using my story for good is something I enjoy as well. So yeah, but theme parks is definitely there.